Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good night, whatever time of the day it is, whichever part of the world you are. Let me say welcome to you to this, the 2021 United Nations Day of Education, Professional Development Education Program that we are having today. Our team is Rebranding Teachers for Sustainable Teaching and Learning in COVID-19 Era and the Decade of Action. Today we have a myriad of excellent speakers, well-grounded, rooted in their area of expertise and along the line of education. They all have a passion for education, and they are here today to share their knowledge with us. They are here today to enlighten us, to uplift us, and to equip us and even give us more tools that we will need to go forward and to the educational drive here today. So my name is His Excellency Dr. Devon Bannister. I am the Pro-Chancellor for Psyche International University and Seminary. So without any further ado, I would like to give you guys a brief overview as to the concept of this entire event that will be hosted today. So the COVID-19 has created overall disruption on global development from the local community, affecting human personality and well-being. Overall, systems are disrupted, including school systems, yet education remains the most paramount for societal progress and imperative for achieving the decade of action success by 2030. At the recent global celebration to mark the third anniversary of the United Nations Day of Education, in which the Secretary General Antonio Guterres noted that when education is interrupted, it affects everyone. I say that again. When education is interrupted, it affects everyone. And we've seen how the pandemic has done that. It has affected students, teachers, and families. So the pandemic has dashed hopes of a brighter future among vulnerable populations. Education is the foundation for expanding opportunities, transforming economies, fighting intolerance, protecting the planet, and achieving the sustainable development goals. With that said, we have our first speaker who will come to us to highlight for us from the 2021 UN Day of Education, recovery and revitalize education for a COVID-19 generation in developing countries. Coming to speak to us, she's the Executive Director for Center for SDG Global Education USA. She's the president of Barjuni and Irene Menekaya Foundation International. She's a proprietor as well, the Irene Menekaya School in Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me make welcome Dr. Ada Ukika as she comes to speak to us. Dr. Ada, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bannister. Just a brief of the highlights of the 2021 UN Day of Education that was held virtually on January the 25th. Due to the present global challenge, the 2021 Day of Education was held virtually, and these are highlights from the virtual and video presentations. The UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay noted, "We must make education our priority in recovery plans." The Assistant Director General for Education, Stephanie Gianni, noted, "We are here to celebrate and alert. Education is under threat. 2/3 of the global student population are still affected by full and partial school closures." From the new UNESCO data, we are informed that 1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic, over 800 million students were more than half of the world's student population, still face significant disruptions to their education, ranging from full school closures in 31 countries to reduced or part-time academic schedules in another 48 countries. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in a video message, informed, "When education is interrupted, it affects everyone, especially students, teachers, and families," he said. The pandemic has dashed hopes of a brighter future among vulnerable populations. Education is a foundation for expanding opportunities, transforming economies, fighting intolerance, protecting the planet, and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Stressing the urgency to address social and economic inequalities, His Excellency Volkan Bozkır, the President of 75th UN General Assembly, informed recovery priorities for education. Let me be clear, SDG 4 is not just about the classroom. It is about society. Education has the power to break the cycle of poverty and conflict. Education can also build media and information literacy, producing global citizens who are better able to engage critically in the world. His Excellency Ambassador Og Ing, Deputy Permanent Representative of Norway to the United Nations and the chair of the Group of Friends for Education and Lifelong Learning, honored the role of teachers throughout this crisis. He commemorated the tireless efforts of teachers, school administrators, government officials, and other dedicated individuals who have made possible that children and youth continue to learn, even against the largest disruption of our education system due to COVID-19 pandemic. His Excellency Ambassador Tijan Mohammed Bande, the permanent representative of Nigeria to United Nations, called on all education stakeholders to put education at the center of their response and recovery for COVID-19. He further noted the notion of leaving no one behind should start with education as the greatest investment for society and the most effective equalizer. Christopher Du, a blind activist from Burkina Faso, talked about his efforts in making education available for visually impaired learners by scanning textbooks and making them accessible to students in his country. Mala Vasquez, a teacher from Honduras, explained how she was determined to make sure that children receive adequate meals at home during school closures with support from the World Food Program, together with learning resources. For some children, their only meals were the ones provided by school. Durata, a teacher from Albania who supported the broadcasting of classes on national television, said, teachers must be trained and equipped for digital skills to best respond to student needs everywhere. Jabi Frost, winner of the Vary Foundation's COVID-19 Hero Award and creator of a math learning platform, emphasized the role of technology in education and its continuity. While technology can't replace teachers and classroom teaching, it can cover and make learning possible. Ake from Ministry of National Education in Turkey, a country hosting the largest refugee population in the world, explained initiatives to prevent learning losses, including the provision of learn-at-home kits, storybooks, and hygiene needs, with support from UNICEF. Alan Godman, president of Institute of International Education, highlighted the challenging financial situation that foreign students faced around the world during the lockdown and the lessons learned to better face such an emergency in the future, but was convinced that after every pandemic, the surge for international student mobility quickly resumes. Nyara Dazi, from African Union's Goodwill Ambassador on Ending Child Marriage and Chief Executive of Rosaria Memorial Trust, stressed that governments around the world needed to take bold decisions to make sure that learning never stops for students. We need daring, bold, and courageous financing right now, she noted. Debt cancellation is key for countries to be able to continue to spend more on education. The Director of Global Education at the World Bank, Jamin Savadra, said in a video message, we need to use the window of opportunity that this pandemic opens, not only to build back, but to build forward a more effective, equitable, and resilient education. Jutta Upland, the EU Commissioner for Partnership, stated, education is the most powerful tool to build back better. It is crucial for the future of all children. That's why he decided to increase the education budget from 7% to 10%. With these highlights, we'll open the floor to this pertinent discussion on rebranding teachers for sustainable teaching and learning in the COVID era and decade of action, by inviting a special guest speaker, His Excellency, Professor Mohammed Bande, the permanent representative of Nigeria to United Nations and the former president of UN General Assembly 74 section. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. At the outset, I would like to commend the organizers and our hosts, as well as by an invitation to me to deliver the opening remarks on this auspicious occasion. I would also like to thank our moderator and speakers who will be discussing one of the defining issues of our day, quality education. Distinguished guests, there's no denying the fact that education remains a significant aspect of development. It's a fundamental pillar for unleashing the potential of the human mind. From health advances and agricultural innovations to efficient public administration and private sector growth, the one key tool that has made this possible worldwide is education. The phenomenal advancement of the global north is one prime example where education has served to build a resilient society, spur job creation, and poverty eradication, among others. For all countries, progress has been recorded for more accessible and inclusive education since the turn of the millennium. The COVID-19 pandemic is, however, threatening to reverse much of the gains we have made thus far. It's also sad to note that many people in the developing world are still facing significant barriers to access to free and qualitative education. The adoption on 3rd December 2018 of the landmark United Nations General Assembly resolution declaring 24th January every year as International Day of Education has thus provided opportunity to explore more innovative ways of increasing the reach of education and enhancing partnerships that would make quality education not only more accessible, but also more sustainable. This is even more so as the ethical principle of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development enjoins us to leave no one behind. A reminder to pay special attention to those in vulnerable situations. Distinguished guests, it's no exaggeration to say that COVID-19 has been devastating for education, as it has resulted in unprecedented school closures. Over 1.6 billion students have experienced a disruption in education. In effect, 94% of the world's students have been impacted, with students in low and lower to middle income countries being the most affected. For the most vulnerable children, including girls and children with disabilities and children in fragile contexts, return to school is not guaranteed. This will affect their literacy achievements. It will also threaten their analytical and critical thinking skills, thus affecting their capacity for tolerance and intercultural dialogue. The stakes for the well-being and health of our society, distinguished colleagues, are that high. The pandemic is exacerbating pre-existing inequalities. Today, millions of students are unable to access the internet at home. Even in the most endowed countries, parents are struggling to balance work commitments and the needs of learning remotely. Moreover, 2/3 of teachers are not equipped with the skills to deliver online learning. Clearly, some lessons are being learned so far from the pandemic, that education cannot be totally dependent on delivery models bound to a specific time and or location. Technology will continue to play an even stronger role in the future of education. Distance learning platforms will improve and provide more virtual and adaptive experiences and assimilate them into the instructional process. Open educational resources and pedagogy will be more greatly integrated into the curricula, broadening the community of teachers and learners. However, the resilience of these systems would depend on several factors, such as financing, training, retraining, infrastructure, and above all, cooperation and partnership between and among states, as well as between other jurisdictions. Despite demonstrable decades-long progress around the world, at the onset of the pandemic, estimates showed that some 265 million children were out of school, and this figure was projected to fall to 220 by 2030. more than half of the students who were enrolled in school were not meeting minimum proficiency standards in reading and mathematics. Over 130 million girls were out of school, and over 1 billion girls and young women lacked the skills they needed to succeed in a rapidly developing world. During the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly, which I had the honor to preside over, we chose quality education SDG 4 as one of the overarching priorities of the session and ensured it was mainstreamed throughout the work of the Assembly and beyond. Recognizing that quality education is important and the fact that no nation can develop past its educational capacity, we worked to ensure that member states partnered on teacher training, access to free and quality primary and secondary education, among others. In 2015, the United Nations adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and committed to achieving equal access to quality education for all. We must ensure that we urgently tackle the disruptions the pandemic has already caused to education around the world. As we recover and rebuild from the 2019 pandemic, I call on governments and all stakeholders to mainstream education in their response to mitigate conflict, hunger, poverty, and instability which weaken a student's ability to learn. In order to learn, students require a safe learning environment, free from bullying, as well as adequate sanitation facilities and clean running water, a safe path to school, as well as safety in the schools, electricity, modern infrastructural materials, and internet connectivity. It is therefore clear that we can only make gains on implementing SDG 4 if we approach it as a cross-cutting area which spans multiple portfolios. It is a truism that no educational system can rise above the quality of its teachers. We must do more to ensure that we have adequately trained teachers. In addition, due consideration should be paid to the importance of curricula, as strong curricula taught by well-trained teachers is essential to ensuring a high level of learning which meet the needs of students and the needs of continually changing society. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, as we begin the decade of action and delivery to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, there can be no barriers to entry into education. Education is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as such, it is our responsibility to guarantee that it is upheld in all contexts. We must guarantee at a minimum universal access to basic education for every child everywhere. It is imperative to highlight that education is the great equalizer. And if we fail to invest in our people, we'll fail in ensuring that they live dignified, meaningful, and prosperous lives. In this regard, we cannot afford to forget about children and young people with disabilities, those who are often most at risk of being left behind. We must make sure that facilities meet the needs of all children so that they can achieve their goals. We must encourage and equally enable girls to study and have careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. According to the World Bank, ensuring that girls complete at least 12 years of education would add $30 trillion to the global economy. Including girls in education is not just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. In conclusion, Excellencies, I wish to remind that as we build back better, we have a moral obligation to guarantee that this pandemic does not widen existing educational gaps. The notion of leaving no one behind should start with education as the greatest investment for society and most effective equalizer. This necessarily requires genuine and enduring partnerships across communities and states. I urge us all to give support to this endeavor. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Mohammed Bandi, the permanent representative to the mission, sorry, of the Nigerian country to the UN. Thank you very much to you, sir. At this time, I would like to invite one of his colleagues to come and give us some remarks on him. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ambassador Dennis Antoine.
Good morning, colleagues, panelists, Dr. Adder. Now, I don't know what I can say to my colleague, Professor Ambassador Mohammed Bandi. I think his remarks said it all, very pertinent. But the observation I want to make is a phrase that he uttered, that no country can develop past its educational capacity. I think this is very pertinent. Nigeria is a leading global landmark for generations of African. And so I believe that the professor who wears so many hats, I call you professor, but you're ambassador. So you have an understanding of the need of our nations, of our people. And so I applaud the fact that you have managed to put together those signals that you sent out in your speech, and it gives us a lot to process. And I want to thank you. I think it's a real good privilege to listen to my informed colleagues. And this morning, I'm again thanking you for raising the bar. And let us not just talk about what needs to be done and make great speeches. We have a charge to go beyond here. So I would not dare to make any further remark, but to thank you for exciting the panel. And I look forward to hearing more from you and my colleagues. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. At this time, we're going to open the floor for a few questions. If anyone have any pertinent questions that they would like to ask for Ambassador Professor Mohammed. If you do, please drop it in the Q&A section. But we'll open the floor just for a few minutes if anyone have any questions, because from what we know, you have to leave us shortly. So if anyone have any questions for him, please do post your questions here in the Q&A section, and we can ask him right away.
There's no question in the chat box. Can you go on to the next speaker?
Yeah. All right. So at this time, let me say thank you very much once again, His Excellency, Professor Mohammed. Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence and for speaking to us today and for launching this meeting. So at this time, we're going to move on now to some of our keynote presentations. And coming to speak to us is Dr. Trina Yearwood. She's the Associate Dean, School of Education, LIU Brooklyn, and also an adjunct professor, Department of African Studies in the Brooklyn College. She will be speaking to us on rebranding teachers for sustainable teaching and learning in COVID-19 era and a decade of action. So at this time, Dr. Trina, please, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Greetings, His Excellencies, distinguished speakers, and participants. Thank you, Dr. Akika, for the invitation to speak today, and a very special thank you to Ambassador Bandy for really setting the stage and letting us and reminding us of the urgency. In March 2015, the United Nations announced its International Decade for People of African Descent. During this decade, the international community is supposed to recognize that people of African descent represent a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected. According to Ban Ki-moon, former United Nations Secretary General, quote, "We must remember that people of African descent are among those most affected by racism. Too often, they face denial of basic rights, such as access to quality education," end quote. As a woman of African descent, the purpose of this international decade resonates with me now more than ever because a global pandemic has magnified the racism, educational inequities, and denial of basic human rights that my people still face. I recently attended a virtual discussion with Isabel Wilkerson about her New York Times bestseller book, Caste. During the talk, Ms. Wilkerson explained that what the world witnessed at the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, was the result of hundreds of years of silence. As she spoke, I recall the news reports across the nation that declared January 6th as the darkest day in American history. I remembered listening to journalists and elected officials assert that the breach of the Capitol was sickening to all true Americans, and the world's eyes are on us. I even thought about an article published by the editorial board of the New York Daily News that said we must, quote, Teach this day of infamy to our children. Teach it so they feel the deep embarrassment so that they never let it happen again. End quote. Teach this day of infamy to our children. What about all the other days of infamy? I wondered if our children are to feel deep embarrassment. Teach this day of infamy to our children. What about all other days of infamy? I wondered. If our children are to feel deep embarrassment about January 6, 2021, then they must also feel deep embarrassment about the hundreds of years of silence. They must feel deep embarrassment about innocent Black people dying at the hands of law enforcement. They must feel deep embarrassment about the Flint, Michigan water crisis and its long-term effects on its residents, including our children. They must feel deep embarrassment about the 35 million people across the US, a developed country, that were food insecure prior to the pandemic, as well as the 490,000 COVID deaths during the pandemic. And most importantly, they must feel deep embarrassment about the legacy of stolen land, genocides, slavery, Black codes, Jim Crow laws, white supremacy, and racial discrimination that pervades this nation, dwells in our educational systems, and provokes insurrections. January 6th, that dark day in American history, ironically shed light on the girdling roots of anti-Blackness that is causing this country to hemorrhage. In order for our children to become agents of change who prevent events like January 6th from happening, they must all receive a quality education, especially during this pandemic that has made existing learning gaps worsen. In the Right to Education in Emergency Situations, a resolution adopted by the United Nations in July 2010, we are urged to, quote, provide quality education in emergency situations that is gender sensitive, centered on learners, rights-based, protective, adaptable, inclusive, participatory, and reflective of the specific living conditions of children and youth, and that pays due regard as appropriate to their linguistic and cultural identity, mindful that quality education can foster tolerance and mutual understanding and respect for the human rights of others, end quote. According to a January 2021 UNESCO report, over 800 million students, more than half the world's student population, still face significant disruptions to their education. Clearly, as nations, we have failed our children. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it has taught us that we cannot continue with business as usual. Now is the time to stop making promises and resolutions and commitments and take action. Now is the time to develop effective, timely, and practical solutions to these inequities. Now is the time to dismantle colonial systems of education, and according to James Baldwin, be prepared to go for broke. As the Associate Dean of a School of Education, I want to focus specifically on SDG 4's Target 4C because it speaks to the preparation of qualified teachers. In order to rebrand teachers for sustainable teaching and learning, we must examine the institutions that prepare them and our role in the rebranding process. I am a logophile. I love words and pay attention to their meanings and the ways in which they are used. And I was intrigued by today's theme and the organizer's decision to use the word rebranding. What is rebranding, and why and how do we rebrand teachers? The English teacher in me, who had the privilege of teaching grammar to my high school students, broke down rebranding into parts: re, to do again, and branding, the promoting of a product or service by identifying it with a particular brand. In preparation for today's conversation, I asked teachers to share their image of teaching before they entered the classroom and their image of teaching after they entered the classroom. Many of the pre-teaching responses were positive. They included revered, fighting to change curricula and empower students, nurturing, happiness from fulfillment, and the ability to teach holistically. Many of the post-teaching responses, however, were concerning. They included supporting curricula that do not serve our students, a Sisyphean task, creating future people who are obedient, miseducated, silent, and compliant to the injustices of the world around them, too political and bureaucratic, and sadly, it is still a thankless job. Their responses were consistent with research that attributed the decline in the profession to decreased autonomy, teaching being undesirable, and the creation of policies without understanding the profession. Teaching is the greatest, most noble, and most sacred profession, and sadly, our brand has been tarnished. If we are truly committed to eradicating poverty and meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, then we must invest in teachers. We need teachers who are innovative and flexible and understand the needs of the communities. We need teachers who are intentional and thoughtful about what they want students to learn. We need teachers like Tanika McCoy Phipps in Kingston, Jamaica, who turned walls in her city into blackboards to host daily classes so that children still had opportunities to learn. And Marla Yolibet Vasquez from Honduras, who made sure students who were at home during school closures received learning resources and adequate meals. Schools of education play a vital role in the sustainable development agenda. And while I'm not an expert in business or marketing, I have modified a 5-step approach to rebranding that we, as well as other educational systems, can utilize to take action during the COVID-19 era and be a part of the solution. 1, know your vision, plan for results. As teacher preparation providers, what is our vision? What do we want to do? Who do we want to become? What type of teacher do we want to be responsible for preparing? How do we plan to evolve to meet the needs of our children and maximize student learning in this present day? We need to ensure that our vision, our collective vision, is the focal point for every decision we make, from hiring to course offerings to program closures. 2, define key stakeholders. Teaching does not happen in isolation. In 1951, Dr. Eric Williams, historian and former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, argued that when the education is so divorced from the needs of the community, it is very difficult to give the correct training to teachers. As teacher preparation providers, we must be deliberate about identifying and collaborating with our key stakeholders to develop a deep understanding of the needs of our community and to adequately prepare teachers. These stakeholders can then constitute an advisory council to provide feedback and guidance for continuous program improvement. Stakeholders to consider are parents, students, faculty, P12 colleagues, community members, related service providers, elected officials, alumni, liberal arts and sciences colleagues. 3, establish a communication plan. How are we going to let our community and stakeholders know what our new brand is? What are we committed to? Will we be ready to let all stakeholders know that we are committed to preparing qualified teachers to develop culturally and globally competent citizens who will find solutions to world crises and be advocates of social justice? What will our message be? 4, create a project timeline. With a little under 10 years left to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN's Decade of Action calls for accelerating sustainable solutions to all the world's biggest challenges. While there are a number of changes that must be accomplished, we need to move with urgency and start with the low-hanging fruit now. 5, design the ultimate project plan. While this is not an exhaustive list, from my professional perspective, the following changes to schools and colleges of education are priorities. Recruitment. Schools and colleges of education must begin targeted recruitment in order to admit students who take initiative, are creative, are critical thinkers, believe in the humanity and intellect of our children, have empathy, and are committed to social justice. We need prospective teachers who are worthy and deserving to stand in front of our children. And once we recruit those students, we need to make sure that teacher preparation programs are affordable. Astronomical tuition keeps underrepresented groups out of the profession, and this is an issue of equity. Create teacher education pipelines. If we want to prepare teachers who are racially aware, critically conscious, and culturally competent, then we need diverse teacher education leaders and faculty. According to the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, the majority of deans are white women in their 50s, and 84% of full-time tenured or tenure-track faculty are white. We need pipelines of diverse leaders who are committed to diversity, inclusion, equity, and social justice to move the vision of the institution forward. And we need diverse faculty to prepare the next generation of problem solvers. We cannot prepare teachers to teach children for the 21st century when teacher education faculty are stuck in the 19th or 20th century. In education, we always talk about the importance of modeling. Well, modeling begins in preparation programs. We cannot expect our students to become the teachers or the leaders that we are not. Curriculum revision. Teacher preparation programs need to revise curricula in order to meet 21st century workforce and entrepreneurial demands. To that end, curricula must include the work of Black and other marginalized scholars who have contributed to the field of education. Curriculum must be grounded in asset-based and culturally responsive and sustaining education theories, not cultural deficit theories. Curriculum must be created in collaboration with P12 colleagues and other stakeholders, including scholars in Africana and other ethnic study programs. Curriculum must also provide opportunities for candidates to learn about authentic student teaching, relationship building, trauma-informed pedagogy, school-family collaborations, and restorative justice. For undergraduates who want to become teachers, teacher preparation programs must require an African civilization course as a part of the history core curriculum program in order to highlight and center the African narrative that is often excluded from world history curricula and textbooks. Continuing professional development. Schools and colleges of education must offer opportunities for alumni and other teachers to continually develop their knowledge in history, content, and theory through effective ongoing professional development. Develop innovative partnerships for sustainable teaching and learning. Schools and colleges of education must think outside of the box and develop innovative partnerships to prepare teachers. For example, prior to this pandemic, the superintendent of Brooklyn South, Mr. Michael Prayer, developed an innovative program to give his students exposure to a community of entrepreneurs, engineers, and inventors to develop visions for the future that will impact their communities and the world around them. Imagine teacher candidates engaging in this experience to think of innovative and creative ways and reimagine truly what teaching and learning can look like in the 21st century. In the beautiful Caribbean island of Jamaica, there is an NGO named Mission Food Possible that Forbes magazine said might be the answer to the world's hunger crisis. Mission Food Possible's comprehensive food security program was designed to train, empower, and sustain the community. Imagine prospective teachers working with this NGO to learn more about food security or conduct research on the impact of healthy and nutritious meals on student learning. And finally, continuity planning. According to the Chronicle of Higher Education, the pandemic has pushed approximately 337,000 workers out of US higher education. Many of these employees were instrumental to the advancement of the institution and departed with a wealth of institutional history and knowledge. Many schools and colleges of education lost personnel and resources necessary to adequately prepare teachers. We need to develop continuity plans to ensure that services and products are delivered, resources are reallocated, and the fidelity of our programs are maintained during a disruption. A good example of continuity planning in higher education during this pandemic is the internationally recognized University of the West Indies, with campuses in developing countries that supported their staff with rapid training in using an online platform. Their responsiveness and support of faculty, staff, and students can be found on their website under UE Teaching and Learning Remotely. When I started high school almost 30 years ago, I wanted to be a lawyer. In my 9th grade English class, however, I met Dr. Diane Barton, the woman who would change my life trajectory. Dr. Barton introduced me to texts for, by, and about Black people. She set high expectations and used my lived experiences to support teaching and learning in the classroom. She believed in me. She cared about me. She taught to my humanity and allowed me to see hers. By the end of my freshman year, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be just like Dr. Barton so that I could inspire young lives the way she inspired mine. She branded this profession for me. And we need to have teachers like Dr. Barton and others across the globe to rebrand the profession. In a recent conversation with Dr. Barton, she said, teaching is love made visible. My love for this profession and for teachers led me to create TREAT, Teachers Ready to Educate, Advocate, and Transform, a professional learning network that provides informal professional development to support teaching and learning and to build a cadre of like-minded individuals who are committed to the success of our students. And I've seen love from teachers locally and globally who have gone above and beyond to build community with their kids, create virtual environments for their students to learn, and care effectively for their children while trying to find balance in their own lives. What will your love for the profession and humanity move you to do? As we think about the action that must be taken in order to rebrand teachers and ensure quality and inclusive education for all, I want to leave you with a poem entitled A Chance at Love, from Love from the Vortex and Other Poems, authored by my friend and colleague, Dr. Yolanda Sealy Ruiz. It is senseless to think this will be easy, but if we follow the paths where our hearts lead, we know it can be possible. Rebranding teachers by dismantling colonial systems of education will not be easy. In fact, dismantling any system of oppression will not be easy because so many people in this country and across the globe benefit from it. But now is the time to act. Now is the time to make decisions. In the words of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, it is our moral obligation to give every child, not some children, not white children, not privileged children, not wealthy children, but every child, the very best education possible. By putting our children first, we can ensure a better and more sustainable future for all people. Thank you.
Every child, all, not one, not two, not if I like this one, if you like this one, you prefer this one, you prefer that one, or if you prefer this teacher, you prefer that teacher, but all. Thank you very much, Dr. Trina Yearwood.
You're welcome.
Let's take a drink with Dr. Trina for that. That was excellent. Oh my God. The teachers out there, I don't know what the teachers out there. I'm a teacher myself. My wife is a teacher. My sister is a teacher. My late brother was a teacher. And then there's so many teachers out there. I could even look back at the teachers that taught me in school. There's one particular teacher right now in the country of Guyana that the country they should be recognizing him, but they're not. Why? Because he made such a great impact in one community. He left his paid job. I'm talking about Robin Phillips. He left his paid job to go and to help the community, the children that were being neglected. So with that being said, thank you very much, Dr. Yearwood. Excellent, excellent, excellent. At this time, we will be moving on to our next speaker. He will be speaking to us. He will be speaking to us on strategic action intervention in rebranding teachers for sustainable teaching and learning. Let's welcome Parmigiana David. He's the World Federation of Associations of Teachers Education. Mr. David, over to you, sir.
Good afternoon from Italy. My name is Davide Parmigiani. I'm Associate Professor of Education at University of Genova, Italy, but I'm here as a representative of the World Federation of Association of Teacher Education. And I'm also president of the European Association for Teacher Education. So I'm here just to summarize some results about the global issues regarding the new challenges to be faced by teachers in these strange times. So I would like to list 4 perspectives. The first one can be named technological perspective. And this point it concerns the equipment and the devices availability for families to carry out good technological lectures and lessons online. This is a big problem in this period because our studies highlighted that between the 30 to 70%, depending on the areas and on the different countries around the world, don't have enough devices and good connection level for having good lessons online. And this is a big problem for families, mainly in the poorest areas. And the poorest areas are spread in different countries. So, for instance, in the southern part of Italy, or in some suburb areas of certain towns in different part of Europe. So, to face this question, we should support a kind of financial support for families. The second perspective can be called social perspective. And this perspective includes two main points: the educational poverty and the equity and social justice. Why? Because in addition to the technical poverty, uh, there is always a kind of educational poverty, which means a difficulty for certain categories to understand the value of technology in education and understand the value of education. So it would be important to set up a kind of social support for individuals, for families, and in general for disadvantaged categories located in different areas of each country. The third perspective can be named cognitive perspective. And this is particularly important for teachers because the main categories hit by the COVID-19 pandemic are the pupils with disability, the pupils with spatial learning difficulties, pupils with several and various educational needs, in particular linguistic difficulties. So I'm referring in particular to the immigrants that they have to manage online lessons through devices in different languages. In this case, it would be necessary to enlarge the policies and the strategies to create inclusive learning environments. And the last point, the last perspective, can be called educational perspective. Uh, this perspective is composed of two main points: teaching strategies and learning environments. On the one hand, it's absolutely important to support teachers in enabling technological infrastructures and strategic infrastructures to arrange new kinds of lessons, probably setting up hybrid environments composed of on-site and online activities. And the second point, learning environment, means that we should support policies to create meaningful learning environments. So, as you could understand, uh, from a global point of view, it's necessary, on the one hand, to support families, then teachers, then policies for new learning environments. I can imagine that you already know the UNESCO Global Teacher Campus, which is just an initiative to support the education for teachers to arrange new kinds of learning environments. So I think that these are the main points to be developed and to face. Of course, as we met last week with several associations for facing this point, and we think that we can, in this moment, to set up online support for teachers in order to create new ways for teaching. So I think that these are my points. I'm really sorry if I leave too early this important meeting, but I have to bring my mother to the hospital, and I'm very sorry and I apologize for leaving the meeting. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. David. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your contribution, and we hope and pray that all goes well with your mother. Let me also apologize to the speaker, Professor Joe, who should have been speaking in this spot, but we just had to make the switch to accommodate Dr. David so that he can be able to make his point and then slip out to go with his mom. So at this time, we will be going back now to our keynote presentation for our second keynote speaker, who will be speaking to us. He's going to be taking a little bit of a twist to it now. So he will be focusing on reimagining teachers in developing and developed countries in revitalizing education for the decade of action. So coming to speak to us, he is a professor of mathematics at the City of University in New York. He's the chair advisory council to Barjuni and Iri Menakaya Foundation International. So please help me welcome Professor Joe Omikoyi. Yes.
Greetings, everyone. I appreciate all the panelists, all you distinguished scholars. I am almost on my way out of living in New York and spending more time in Africa. I'm working with Dr. Sam Donkor, the president of All Nations University in Ghana, Akufo-Addo, where I developed the math program for them in 2010 to 2012 when I was in Ghana. Then I left for Nigeria, where I'm working right now, both between Ghana and Nigeria. The pandemic slowed us down. So please pardon me, I will not speak much about my work in New York, even though I'm in New York right now, but I'll spend more time after the pandemic to develop all that we're doing in Ghana and in Nigeria. But let me talk about rural Africa. I'm having Ghana and Nigeria in mind, the two models that are my concern, serving in the board of our university in Ghana, and also using our church base in New York for the funding to do what we're doing in Idato local government area in Imo State of Nigeria, where we are working with local school boards and districts. And for the last 10 years, I have come to find that the word used in rebranding is a word we have started struggling with for over the years in Africa. What I have found out with my team is that for us, teaching is about who we are as teachers. Let me explain that a bit. For those in the West, they may not get this concept very easily. But for us in rural Africa, teaching is about who we are as teachers. And so it has to do directly how we influence what we do. Not just what we teach only. What we do influences the child, especially in the context of the classroom, and going beyond the classroom. And I will explain. So keep that in mind, that it is about who we are as educators and how that directly influences what we do in the classroom and going beyond the classroom to the community. Because the child comes to school hungry. The child comes to school not properly attired. The child comes to school unprepared. The child comes to school ill-equipped. The list goes on. And one of the classroom I'm working with in a particular village in the Idata area, the children sit in the brick blocks used in building houses. The classroom has no chairs and no table, no desk. They have to sit in blocks to do their work. So we went in there, changed all that. We started building desks and chairs and good blackboard and so forth. That's a different time, we discussed that. So we are working. For us, it's a little more trial. So I want to spend a little few time so that in case of any question. For us, what rural education, rural elementary education actually mean may be quite different from the concept from the West. We're not trying to catch up with what goes on in the West, but to propel the rural child, especially the girls in particular, to begin to focus on science and technology and mathematics. It has been my lifelong pursuit to make sure I get women, both when I was chair of my department here and so forth, to make sure that we recruit a lot of our women, I mean Black, I mean women, to get into math. So it becomes my joy to now go back to the root of the problem. That in Africa, mainly where I come from, particularly, I grew up not far from this place where we're working right now. The science, the math are mainly the boys who are pursuing those areas. And I start thinking how we can help to do that. So we trying to propel not just only the girls, but all of them to focus on technology at this point in time, as much we can, to help all of them, especially our girls, to catch up in terms of science and mathematics, and to overcome issues that can deter them, stereotypes, and all kinds of things. But I'll go into that in a minute, which where the teachers have to learn. So I'm trying to both bring in the cultural context, content, and character into all that we do. So our aim, which I believe, and I will argue, that for the rural education, positive learning context is primary, very important. And just like when I was at Teachers College here at Columbia University in New York, one of the things I learned in the early 80s when I was there as a student, 81, 82, 83, 84, when I left there, 87, it was this intentional teacher decisions, that everything you do as a teacher must be intentional. And I'm working on that. But I find it more pertinent in this rural teacher education, intentional teacher decisions, because most of them are ill equipped, not well trained, and not exposed to a lot of things. Then the other thing that we need to bring to this panel, maybe in the future we're going to work on these things, is what I call student satisfaction. Because education, even when I was growing up back home, we are not often made the focus of finding out, are we satisfied with what we're learning? We're just giving root, for math, for example, all of this is just root learning. Whether you know it or not, I never saw pulley. I did physics and I had A in school side. Same with math, but I never saw pulley till I came to New York to see how it functions. Most of this I learned in science, and even at the university back home. So one of the things I did there, I never saw it until I came here, but in computer science and so forth. But you see, we don't evaluate this. The rural school communities and the school need to get back to student satisfaction with what we get, the quality education, the content, the character, and so forth. So in that direction, I will urge that our training of rural teachers in elementary school in particular begin to pay attention to make the teacher visible to the child. The children are scared of the teachers, scared. In some rural communities, you can be surprised that they use corporal punishment on these children. So I don't know how we're going to solve some of this, and the raising of voice and anger, using all kinds of coercion to even get the child to come to learn. And some of them are dragged every morning to school because they're hungry and so forth. So I don't know how we're going to solve all that. It's all work in progress. So empowering the students through all kinds of measures. But it will take me a whole day here with you discussing that. So let me skip that and just bring you to what I call the ABCD, which I have found out to be primarily what I think should be important. Now, let me say this. The ABCD is the attitude, the A. It's in the culture. The B is in the belief of what holds us back as a people, as a community, where the school is. The school in the rural is part of the community. And that I believe that govern most of the attitude of the teachers and the students and the parents. And also look at the character of what makes a great teacher. It's deficient, really, in most of this area. And finally, I brought a model that I took with me from New York back to Ghana and to Nigeria, which I called the car dealership mentality. We teachers, I'm training them to feel like they're selling a car. The same way you sell a car and you are the car dealer. See it that way. You may not own the shop, but your job is to sell a good car, the car you're selling, to this student to buy it and enjoy it and use it. So I'm working on that, and I'm doing a paper on that car dealership mentality to education. It's a whole work I'm doing there, which I'm going to ask some of you to co-author with me over time if you're interested. And then also, so I want to keep you long because I mean, my head is running. I mean, many things that I could say here today, but my main trust in this workshop, this panelists arrangement these days, to urge you all to think about the real teacher, the way we can train them, help them, support them. So much work to be done in Africa. Especially, I'm speaking from the Nigerian Ghana context. The first one is, how do we bring this step-by-step approach to this issue that I raised here: teacher attitude, belief, character development in the teacher, and also this car dealership mentality. It's a whole lot of things, so much catching up to do from that angle. Then the other thing is the guidance on concrete instructional strategies to these teachers in rural area. You'll be surprised that their teaching has no strategy, no sense of direction and purpose. You just go through a curriculum, you just dish it out and earn your salary, and sometimes they go for months not paid. The teachers. I saw one of the teachers in elementary school there. In the morning, he goes early to give injections, medicinal dispensary, to people in the village before he comes to the classroom. That's how he earns his money. They have not been paid for 6 months. 6 months, no salary. So how is he going to function as a teacher? But we're working with all those things to come to find a way to help them and guide them on concrete instructional strategies. They can come prepared every day to teach, to work in the classroom, not go around doing all kinds of jobs before they come to the classroom, or halfway in the school day, they leave the school to go and see their patients, or to go to the farm and come back, or go and look at the guy driving their motorcycle for them, how much he made for the day. So there are other things. Specifically, I'm looking at pedagogical innovations that we can bring to the local areas, inculcating the cultural context into the educational context. And when I say cultural context of the community, so that I have in mind, make it a part of the curriculum, a part of the things we do, and how to evaluate. That's very key for me. How do we evaluate successful learning context? How do we? That's an area we need to work on. And there are a lot of research work out there already here in the West on how to evaluate successful learning context and contents. But we lack that in Africa. So I would say more. I hope we will have more of this kind of this next time, so I can come more prepared with all my materials when I come back from this next trip to Ghana and Nigeria. But keep in mind that my focus, my attention is for rural Africa, not really here. And that's the point I'm bringing to you all. And in the UN context, I wish all of us can get involved. And I want to travel with you all next time to Ghana and to Nigeria if you're willing to come along, so you can experience firsthand this whole issues. And also, Idato local government area is very interesting area in Imo State. Very funny area. I mean, that's where I come from. So I'm not putting my people there. I grew up there, went to school there, went to high school there, went to university not too far from there. And then also, before I came to Columbia University to do my graduate work. But the issue is this. Remember what I put in mind. Teaching is about who we are as educators and how that directly influences what we do in the classroom and beyond the classroom. So I yield. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Joe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. And all the best on your relocation back to Ghana and the work that you do there. When I do return to Ghana to visit again for my work, we shall connect.
Yes, come to Kofredwa.
Will do. All right then. So now we're going to move on to our plenary section. So here we will be taking a little bit of a. So we earlier we heard Dr. Yearwood. She spoke to us both on the teacher and the students side. So now what we're going to do is we're going to focus a little bit more about the threats, the education, the threat that education is under. So as teachers, what can we do as teachers now when it comes to that? So we're going to ask Dr. Reba Perry, let me leave it there, from the United Federation of Teachers, New York, to come and to give us a little bit of information as to what we can do as teachers when it comes to the threat towards education. Dr. Reba, over to you.
Good afternoon, and hello to all our distinguished guests. I'm honored to be present today. I am a United Federation teacher from New York City. I'm also a daycare provider for 4 daycares in New York City. I absolutely had to change my format as a teacher. I'm also a nurse that work moonlight in the evening. What I'm saying is how the system has changed completely. I went from a daycare to a remote learning center. Unfortunately, a lot of our parents are not equipped to be able to do remote learning because they are not facilitated to be able to be a teacher. I had provided services for my children for 4 months and was not paid because I worked privately, because everybody went into remote learning. But because I'm a nurse also, I was able to supplement my income. I also did food drives in my yard where the daycares are located, because I noticed a lot of my families absolutely had no food. I am not just a daycare provider. I'm a social worker. I'm a nurse. I'm a remote learner. And I'm also a friend to my community. I am also a chaplain and a minister. And I do a lot of hands-on work with my families, because I believe if a child if the parent has full support, then the child does well. I know a lot of people will complain and say, why do I do all of this? Because I remember growing up in a community where my neighbors knew each other, everybody helped and assist each other. But now people have become so involved with their own personal business, they forget that children are still in our community. Now, my daughter, who's a child prodigy, which is Iffy Ufale, we have donated over 200 tablets to children across the board because she's in a lot of chat rooms and she noticed that a lot of children did not have tablets because unfortunately Department of Education ran out. And I said, how can children do their remote learning? And we'll say, well, the parents should just buy them a tablet. You'd be surprised how many parents don't even have $50 in their bank account to be able to accommodate these children. So what I do every day when my children leave, I pack them a snack bag because sometimes we'll think that parents have so many things in their home. Like my refrigerator is full, of course, but there's parents that just don't have it. So I also help assist my parents to apply for SNAP one-shot deal because a lot of us are in a predicament now where we are being evicted from our home, unfortunately, due to the pandemic. What I tell people is when you become a teacher, you're not just a teacher, you are many other categories of the human race. So now in April, me and my daughter will be traveling to Nigeria because that's where her dad is located. That's where my husband lives. And we will be supplying the girls abroad many supplies from sanitary pads to hygiene because my daughter, 15, she is currently in the STEM program at Mega Evans College. And she is also studying to be a future scientist. So what we do is we reach girls in rural areas. They send my daughter an email and they'll say what their needs are. And we make sure we get a business that can support the girls' needs. And it could be anything from a pair of shoes to a tablet. It can be supplies because as business owners, this is what we need to do. And mentally, the pandemic has really put our teenagers in such a bad state. Some are suicidal. So once a month, me personally, I take out 7 teenagers and I have a day for these teenagers to actually just be kids. And we have to understand that everything was taken away from our young people, especially our teenagers. They have no classes with their friends, no proms, no graduation, no sport activities. They can't interact with all their friends because of the fear of COVID and bringing it back home. So how can we make it normal? By allowing them to be young people. Of course, doubling up on masks and making sure no one has a temperature and no one is sick. But this is my priority, to never leave no child behind, not under my watch. You can go under my daughter's website. It's CHUBIILINE.com. And you can actually see all of the things that as a young person. And the reason why I want y'all to be able to see it is because all of our young people are not hanging in the street. She's 15 and she's been featured in all the magazines around the world for her work for empowering girls. And the reason why we say girls is because we're women and we can't say how it is to be a man. So what I'm doing now is my presentation is up here. I kind of went through everything. Okay, he's putting it on. And what I do is I continue keeping our young people empowered. So imagine you're being a teacher and you really equipped for 1 grade. I do remote learning for kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. And I have to keep all those schedules intact. And it's not easy, but I mean, I can multitask because I find a lot of our parents really can't do the remote learning. So now he was able to put this, my PowerPoint presentation. I actually did this morning. Yeah, so you could go on the points for the PowerPoint presentation. It's just basically saying everything that I just said. And that's the statistics, what is remote learning, because a lot of parents are struggling with that. And then also the tips on blended learning, especially my special needs. Yes, I am trained to work with special needs population. I do have 2 autistic children in my program. I don't treat them no different. They blend right into the program. And I give a lot of tips on the remote learning, how to give your children breaks, because a lot of times the teachers expect them to be in the classroom back to back, minimum breaks, especially our special needs population. They're suffering more than anybody because they have to adjust to a lot of things that we're not used to doing. So I give them breaks in between so they don't get frustrated. And these are my tips for successful remote learning. Because a lot of times the parents let the child do the remote learning on their bed. I suggest you to get a desk, purchase a good headset so they can block out noises in the home, because you know all of us are doing multiple things in apartments are small. Give them breakfast every morning so they don't be hungry, or bottle water on the desk. And also just support them and cheer them on and give them rewards. I do that with my students. Once they complete a task, I make sure they get a star or a sticker and let them know they're doing good and praise them, because this is definitely a lot for our young people. And suicide is always the highest among our teenagers. So we have to stay checking in on them. All my students can call me anytime. Even the teenagers, they can call me, because I don't want anybody to be silently suffering. So if you have any questions, and yes, we will be traveling to Nigeria. We just sent over barrels of supplies, from including books, everything. So if you need to contact with me, you can go through Dr. Ada and she'll respond back. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reba. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All the best to your daughter and the work that she's doing, and may she continue to excel and to prosper. May many more doors open for her, and to you also. I know it's a lot. You're pulling here.
It's a lot, but you know, I live off of faith, and my prayer is what keep me going.
That's right. That's right. Keep the faith and hold the faith. Thank you very much to you for your for giving us that. At least now I know. Even though I teach adults, I think I'm going to start giving them some stars as well. But thank you very much. I just had to throw that little bit of joke inside of there. All right. So we're going to be moving now to we'll be hearing from 2 teachers. I think they're both teachers, if I'm correct. I hope so. I don't know what level as well, sorry. But what I do know, they are teachers. So we will have Dr. Esther Okoye, the president of Chineke Horizon Inc. In New York. She will be coming to speak to us now. Dr. Esther Okoye.
Thank you, Dr. Bannister, for your introduction. Thank you, distinguished panelists and distinguished guests and our invitees. Our topic today is on rebranding teachers for remote learning during COVID-19. As a teacher of 17 years myself, I have become very accustomed to the ins and outs of educators' role within a structured classroom environment. In this space, educators such as myself have strived to master the art of using direct observations, detailed assessments, and immediate targeted intervention to assess and optimize the academic capabilities of our students. While in close proximity with students, it remains the standard of practice for teachers to be able to observe and identify students' areas of difficulties and to immediately correct recognized errors. And this is usually performed by presenting ideas or concepts in a small digestible chunks, which accompany visual lessons. Prior to the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, these close and direct interactions were considered the norm. However, given the new pandemic climate, the previous teaching environment has shifted away from in-person learning to having remote learning become the new landscape for the teaching environment. Remote learning is a form of educational interactions where students and teachers interface over digital platforms, regardless of their physical proximity to one another. With this new landscape, teachers are now charged with the task of standardizing such digital technology as a tool for teaching and assessing students on a regular basis. Many teachers have become understandably nervous about adopting these changes, as it comes as an abrupt departure from the previous direct observation and immediate intervention approaches learned through in-person learning. However, the devastating global impact of the pandemic has made it very clear that not only must teachers have evolved to function beyond the in-person classroom setting, but the amount of teachers activated should be as wide-reaching as the pandemic itself. In our in other words, a global campaign to develop a new era of educators is of utmost importance, and it's the current mission of the United Nations. It's well understood that the role of teachers is greater than the same academic advancement of their students. To quote His Excellency Volkan Bozkır, President of the 75th United Nations General Assembly during the 2021 International Day of Education event, quote, "Let me be clear, Sustainable Developmental Goal 4 is not just a classroom, it is about society. Education has the power to break the cycle of poverty and conflict," unquote. End quote, I'm sorry. Education can also build media and information literacy, producing global citizens who are better able to engage critically in the world. This principle applies to all countries around the world, but is especially significant of developing countries where standard education for all citizens is strained or non-existent. For education advocates under the United Nations to uphold these principles, especially in the face of global calamity that significantly limits the ability for learners and educators to socially contact and connect, they must be able to find solutions to the following issues. Number one, how can we best use new digital technologies to establish and broaden the presence of the virtual classroom and countries around the world? Number two, how can we best prepare educators for the use of digital technologies to effectively teach in new virtual classroom? Number three, how can we ensure that digital technologies will be made available for all educators and learners? Some solution to these questions may be addressed through this means. Teachers need to be provided skills to accommodate a new digital classroom or curriculum for the purpose of managing the digital classroom structure, fluidity, fluency, engage appropriate teaching styles, and incorporating digital resources that are reflective of their various cognitive, affective, and psychic of their students. Teachers will need resources that will allow for communication with students, parents, other educators, and other community stakeholders. There is a need for establishment of teacher exchange, to which broad teacher-to-teacher relations can be established through social media and social inclusions, encouraging teachers and educators worldwide. Efforts can be garnered by national and or local governments, communities, and other education stakeholders to provide funding and access the digital education resources. This includes, but are not limited to, digital tools that facilitate presence of members within a virtual classroom, as well as facilitates their active dialogue and interaction in both speech and text. Knowledge about various international digital platforms such as Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, Zoom chat, etc. Tools to record student responses such as Desmos. A program to display content materials, course information, and a schedule of assignments, knowledge on how to manage remote classroom distractions, and establish means for exercising consequences for delinquencies. Teachers are bestowed a virtue of professional, societal, and moral responsibilities to provide learners with a meaningful education to improve their livelihood and to allow them to positively impact their communities and nation as a whole. The same virtues must also be upheld by governmental systems and the local infrastructure which are necessary to support these learning environments and its participants. For United Nations members and its affiliates to support and advocate for the rewiring of teachers to facilitate their adoption of sustainable teaching and learning system within the area of COVID-19. It is important to understand that any actions taken simply as a starting point in an ever-evolving effort to meet the goals of the United Nations overarching decade of action initiative to pool all available resources and manpower to ensure the best education of global citizens to allow the foundation of a stronger and ever flourishing global community. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Okoye. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now we will be hearing from Professor Alan Saunders.
I'll begin. Your Excellencies, Ambassador Bondi, Dr. Okika. Looking at the rebranding of teachers for sustainable teaching and learning in COVID-19 era and a decade of action, and especially what are the threats to that level of education. Obviously, education has been turned upside down. And what I'm going to try and do today is look at how and what has happened. Peter Firestein wrote a book called Crisis of Character, Building Corporate Reputation in the Age of Skepticism. This was launched at the United Nations. The whole element of business looks at what can be changed. Peter Firestein's looked at businesses around the world. And what's interesting to me is that internships and young people working in developing countries have been able to bring huge amounts of change. For instance, in Peru, there was a situation where BP was building a pipeline through a country, and they created a situation because of young people being there taking videos. They were able to stop the pipeline from happening unless it was involved with communities locally there. So this was one thing that young people can do to be able to bring change. One of the main elements I'd like to emphasize to bring change in young people's lives is something we call service learning. And service learning is very intentional. Young people share goals before they start, and then they have a reflection at the end. A friend of mine, Dr. Stephen Post, wrote a book called Why Good Things Happen to Good People, How to Live a Longer, Healthier, Happier Life by the Simple Act of Giving. And in this book, he has shown with longitudinal studies, he was working at the time at the University of Chicago, now he's out at Long Island University, or Stony Brook University in Long Island. And he has been able to show with longitudinal studies how young people live happier, healthier lives by doing one service project, either in high school or in college. And one thing that's very, very interesting to me now is in Europe, they're creating what's called a gap year in between high school and college, where young people go out and either join a business, do some form of work, and many actually do these types of service projects where they go to developing countries and teach. So this is just a different way of looking at how things can be changed within, within schools and within people. One of the questions I've asked over the last 40 years and working with Dr. Okika on the Conference of NGOs on HIV/AIDS at the United Nations, where I saw Dr. Ada go from someone who had a lot of skills, but maybe not that much confidence to be able to work within the United Nations system. But working with her over a period of years, it was amazing to see her skills come up through being able to guide her and be able to start this organization and do this incredible program today. And I think that's one of the key elements of mentoring that I'm always looking for as I travel around the world. I've taught high school, middle school, and college, and now I do more teacher trainings, especially in developing countries. And I'm always looking for master teachers like Dr. Ada, like Dr. Yearwood, like all the professors on this call here today. I consider you all master teachers because you're really, really concerned not only about your content area, but especially being a person of impeccable character and really connecting to others. So that's a huge element, and young people need to see that. One of the questions I've asked over my period of teaching was, why do some young people make it and others don't? And it doesn't always go by socioeconomic status. And many times I've seen in developing countries, great young people come out. Even if you look at Amanda Gorman, who gave the inaugural address and the poem at the presidential inauguration on January 20th, her skills to be able to speak confidently, a beautiful young, incredibly well, confident young person. And when you consider that young people in general, and people even in society, the number one fear of Americans, for those of you who may not be in this type of field, is public speaking. And you can see that her and the other professors here have a great deal of confidence, whereas most Caucasians and even Asian young people have very little skill in being able to talk. So the developmental assets is something that I wanted to talk about. These are what can make the difference between someone being successful and not successful. And this was developed by the Search Institute from the University of Minnesota. And Dr. Benson created a program where he has what's called 40 developmental assets. And within these development assets, there are external and internal assets. The external assets are more support, empowerment, boundaries and expectations, and constructive use of time. The internal assets are commitment to learning, positive values, social competence, positive identity. So the internal assets more go into what other speakers have talked about of empathy, respect, responsibility, the character traits that can bring the social emotional learning, which is surely lacking. But the external assets are really important, the community connectedness that Dr. Perry was talking about, how we can create an interconnectedness of each other and move forward from that point. He also came up with 5 action strategies to be able to engage adults, mobilize young people, activate sectors, invigorate programs, and influence civic decisions. So these are all elements that can be very, very successful and bring about a huge amount of change. But we have to be able to look at the higher amount of these developmental assets that each young person has, the less likely they are going to be involved with drugs and high risk activities, crime. The lower amount, they're more going to be successful in bringing about change in their lives and affecting others. One other element that I'd like to talk about is how we help young people deal with conflict. And conflict is a regular part of life, and we have to help our young people be able to do that. One of the programs that I work with is from the Arbinger Institute, and it is one of the books that I've taught at the graduate level is Leadership and Self-Deception. And I'll put this material in the chat, and I'll send Dr. Ada the PowerPoint. But the program is called The Anatomy of Peace, Resolving the Heart of Conflict. And that looks at a young Israeli and a Muslim working together in drug rehab programs in Arizona, where they take the young people out to the desert and let them be able to work through all their issues through self-survival of camping out. And the interesting part of that, a lot of the challenge that they've found is actually working with the parents, how they can deal with the parents. Another program that I'll mention briefly is by the Educators for Social Responsibility. It's called Operation Respect. And again, I'll send all this information to Dr. Ada for you all to have available. And they've created a curriculum. Peter Yarrow, Peter, Paul, and Mary created a whole curriculum called Don't Laugh at Me. And that is looking at how we can understand each other's differences, be able to work together and to become successful. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about the importance of character development and how that can bring change. My wife and I worked on a book called Cultivating Heart and Character, Educating for Life's Most Essential Goals. That deals with character development over the course of life. And the final book that I'll talk about is a book my wife wrote, which is called Spill the Scarlet Rain, a Civil War novel. And that's dealing with a love triangle, but it goes into detail of the original sin of slavery at the time of Gettysburg and how that is still pertinent today, as Dr. Yearwood mentioned in her very brilliant presentation. Finally, I'll just mention on Wednesday this week, we have a program with an educator I'm working with from the Cote d'Ivoire, and you're all invited to go to that program. It is by the Center for Leadership and Character Education, and we'll be looking at the centrality of character in leadership. And obviously, over the last decade or so, we've seen a challenge, especially within the political realms, but also in many other realms, and we have to be able to help young people. I'll put my information up in the chat, and thank you very much, Dr. Okiko. I'll just leave it off there.
Thank you very much, Professor Allen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. He is a consultancy, the Sanders Consultancy USA Director, Center for SDG Education USA. So thank you very much, sir, for those information. So coming to the latter part of the program now, we will be hearing from Ambassador Nandi Nizi, if I pronounce it correctly. Please, if I did not, please make sure you pronounce it correctly. Dr. Ada has been working with me to pronounce this name all morning. He's the permanent mission of Nigeria to the United Nations. Ambassador, over to you, sir.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, with barely 10 years, less than 9 years left to the expiration of the global community's timeline for the realization of our collective aspirations, as clearly articulated in the United Nations Agenda 2030 on Sustainable Development. This conversation is not only timely, but urgent. The year 2020 is an extraordinary year in recent human history. The resurgence of COVID-19 pandemic around the world has led to catastrophic results in which public health system is devastated and the well-being of people is threatened. At the same time, as has been said earlier on this conversation that we have today, the pandemic has brought profound impact on education, forcing 1.6 billion students out of school during the peak of the pandemic. Governments and education sector around the globe have stepped in to fill that void and to ease the disturbance and fight against the pandemic to protect students' right to education. They have shown us how to prevail in the face of the major disasters with mankind's courage and wisdom. In the past year, as we can see from various countries, we have taken measures in protecting the lives of students and teachers alike from the prevalence of this newly emerging disease, COVID-19. It is important to state that in the face of the pandemic, the world has upheld the principle of people first and life first. This approach puts teachers and students' safety and health in the first place. In this regard, we have ensured the safety of both students and teachers by mobilizing all possible resources in a very precise and scientific way. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is important to state that education bridges the past, the present, and the future, as it is what makes us who we are and what we will be. Education is the strong instrument to human development. Mankind is confronted with a range of challenges and reforms at the moment. With the growth of technological innovation, a new round of scientific and technological revolution compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic is now driving the global education reform. There is a pressing need for all stakeholders to work together to deal with emerging challenges in the future. We must therefore educate for global competence. The interconnected world that we live in right now requires the young generation to be competent in living and working in a diverse environment. Education for global competence therefore becomes one of the primary goals for the education sector. Education for global competence aims to strengthen education on sustainable development and to help students understand that mankind lives in a community that shares the same future. It also seeks to promote students' understanding of other cultures, teaches them to appreciate the differences, fosters their ability in examining issues with a global perspective, and cultivate in them a will for the well-being of mankind. The students should be armed with knowledge, skills, perspectives, and values for sustainable development. And this is where the important role of teachers come to play. Our teachers today must be trained and retrained to meet with the changing dynamics of the society. We must stand together to build an educational community on a global scale. People throughout the world live in the same global village now, and countries are more interconnected as we have become a community that shares the same destiny. We can only achieve lasting stability and development through strengthening solidarity, partnership, and cooperation. In order to achieve the educational goals and the sustainable development goals, it not only depends on the governance capabilities and trajectory of development of each country, but also relies on the dynamics of global education governance. Indeed, the prospect that COVID-19 will worsen existing education inequalities is a good one, but it is not inevitable. Indeed, the pandemic could be a critical catalyst to propel us to action. The solution to this, as to many other problems, especially concerning education, depends on national actions, international cooperation, and partnership. We need to look into the future with determination and commitment in order to turn this crisis into an opportunity. It has shown the capacity of systems to innovate, expanding the frontiers of learning possibilities, the enterprise of teachers to ensure learning continuity, and highlighted the immense value education holds for learners, families, and communities. Its implications for national development are also very, very clear. We must take advantage of technological innovation to turn this crisis for education into opportunity. Under the fourth industrial revolution, the world is practicing artificial intelligence, new materials, virtual reality, quantum information, etc. We are witnessing a radical transition of innovative solutions from quantitative changes to qualitative changes. The revolution will definitely change the way of life and the world we know now. In other words, the scope and boundaries of the education sector is underway to be reimaged and redefined. We must make full use of the major opportunities brought about by technological innovation, by which science and technology can become a breakthrough for global crisis and a transformative force that leads to the realization of sustainable development goals. As I conclude, I should like to emphasize that COVID-19 has begun its transformation in the world. We cannot afford to miss the momentum created by the changes now taking place to decisively tackle educational gaps and the related inequalities that exist. It is therefore my intention to call on all stakeholders, governments, partners, to address the systemic and structural issues that hamper access to education, so that together we can create a world truly fit for all, where no one is left behind. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nzi. That was well said, well put together. Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll be hearing from His Excellency Ambassador Dennis Antoine. He's the chair, the advisory council, chair for the advisory council, the Center for SDG Global Education USA. Ambassador Antoine, over to you, sir.
Well, distinguished panelists, ambassadors, educators, colleagues, I want to salute you, Dr. Ada, for your persistence in bringing us together on very pertinent topics, as we have been doing for many years now. The challenge of speaking after so many luminaries and to listen to the presentations of professors like Dr. Yearwood and the other very, very, very learned panelists makes it two ways for me. Very easy to say I agree with everybody, and I do not have much to say. And also to take a very generic look at the topic. And that's what I would do. Now, when the United Nations proclaimed January 24th as International Day of Education, now it was in celebration of the role of education for bringing about global peace and sustainable development. Our focus today in our theme is on those who facilitate education, that's teachers. But who are teachers? Where are our teachers? Let us not limit teachers to those who facilitate learning in educational institutions alone. And so my attempt is to have us think as to when we talk about teaching moments and when we talk about the holistic approach to teaching versus imparting knowledge in the tradition or in the socialized process. This COVID-19 pandemic has unmasked and exacerbated the same human and socioeconomic crises which summoned the call many, many years ago, I would say centuries ago. And as we see 6 years ago, the SDGs were presented. We now know that SDG 4, which we have all embraced and spoken of, is the education goal which aims to ensure inclusive quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And then I ask, where? For all, where? Is it for all in America, Jamaica, the Caribbean? And now, if we begin to look at it like that, we're beginning to see everybody in the corners. Oh, it's nice in Lagos, it's nice in Jamaica, it's nice in Brooklyn. And but the goal resonates as teachers scramble to rethink and innovate, and the policymakers struggle to provide reliable support to educators and for education to take place. And teachers are finally recognized and are branded as frontline workers, which they have always been. Now, I want to talk about parents as teachers, which has surfaced in this crisis as a need to have stronger partnerships between home and schools. And above all, the need for teachers who are facilitators of learners and learning. Now, realizing that learners can teach and teachers must be learners. This is, I think Dr. Yearwood's presentation spoke about the professional practice and the need for mastering your craft, if I may surmise it like that. In the current challenges facing education and teaching, teaching requires a collective response to create a brand. Now, a brand of teaching and learning environment that addresses human needs everywhere. Now, rebranding suggests that there was a brand which we embraced. Now, what was that brand that we're rebranding? We have to begin to speak. I think global competence was mentioned just now. I am reminded of methods and materials, new tools and practices. Now, we are in an era where we are scrambling with this right now, because with distance learning and with the virtual approach to enabling continuity as we miss the face-to-face classroom, we have, as teachers, to innovate how we interact, how we approach modalities, how we approach our own fears and inability to engage, as it were. So today, more than ever, going beyond the 17 goals and targets have become an indispensable necessity. Now, living with COVID-19 has ushered an unprepared, transformed condition of living. The impact of the virus reminds us of how things were in underserved areas before the pandemic. So this issue of the pandemic and access to healthcare, who does the pandemic impact most? It is those who have been deprived most. So we have to bear this in mind. In education today, they are even deprived more because they are in situations where there is no access to learning. And that is why the call for a decade of action must now become a sudden acceleration of sustainable solutions. It is vital that we all are reminded that this plague is occurring in the International Decade for People of African Descent, a decade dedicated to recognition, justice, and development for people, of people of African descent. Now, it is not enough for the international community to simply recognize that people of African descent represent a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected. There must be more action towards solutions. Therefore, dramatic change is needed to ensure these rights. Action must be taken now for quick recovery from COVID crisis, to minimize the risk from future potential crisis, and to recover the momentum in the implementation drive toward 2020, toward 2030. Could you imagine going back to 2020? Towards 2030. But we have, through it all, we need educated engagement. And that is where education is important. This educated engagement requires that educators begin to look at best practices, this old concept of sharing best practices for collective responses. this eclecticism, the eclecticism issue, must be raised so we can borrow and blend. In the education of our children, we have to, and the public must achieve, inclusive response, intergenerational engagement, and we must move all on board toward the desired resolution of the current human and socioeconomic crisis. I would end my remarks here by again acknowledging the consciousness that has been raised by all the presenters and to recognize the fact that we are mindful that we are all in this together. And Dr. Ada, I thank you, and I do hope that the solutions and the branding concept that has emerged can benefit each of us in our local or regional and the global community. I thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Ambassador Denis Antoine. Thank you very much for those wonderful remarks and for charging us and reminding us of our duties. Thank you very much, sir. At this time, coming with the closing remarks, let's welcome Engineer Chukwuma Menikaya. He's the Chief Operating Officer for Barjuni and the Irene Menikaya Foundation International. Mr. Menikaya, over to you, sir.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for the wonderful presentations. I want to thank the ambassador, Professor Bande, Ambassador Anthony, and each and every speaker who spoke extensively, throughout this program. There's no doubt that education is really plays a very key role in our global sustainable development and progression in general, be it politically, be it technologically, be it social. And it's really very important that education should be progressed with the present situation that we all experienced last year with the issue of the COVID-19 and the great ideas and different ideas that has been suggested in this program to advance the education purpose globally and also to bring a global integration. So at this time, this program was basically organized by Junior Menaka Foundation, Irene Menaka Foundation, and CITADA. Ambassador Antonio is the consulting personnel from CITADA. So at this time, I would say that the organization, based on the outcome of the discussion on this whole program, we will organize to work to establish the one teachers professional exchange initiative to enable teachers team approach and work to train on professional social emotional learning in rebranding their thoughts in order to be able to bring a better understanding in teaching the young generation. And secondly, we're going to form a confederation of teachers and educators, a forum to encourage and exchange learning throughout the process. I think that's also very important, that really can address, the ability of that global integration. And then lastly, I think this pandemic has shown that, okay, we have to as well have other means of educational establishment and educational learning through digital education, and how best this can be achieved, especially in the more challenging, nations or rural areas. So I want to say thank you all, and we'll continue to all work together to ensure that, education is really brought to the doorstep of every person, down to the most remote or rural area in our global society. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chukwuma Menikaya. Thank you very much for those closing remarks. At this time, I want to say thank you very much to all of our viewers for taking the time to be with us here today. As we've discussed and we have spoken, you have heard from all of our wonderful speakers, from the ambassador himself right down to all of our speakers, every person that has shared. I know for a fact that every person that attended here today, that is listening to us either via Facebook or here on Zoom, you have learned, you have grasped, you have obtained something that you can take back with you to your community or to your school or to your home to help, to nurture, and to move forward the educational system. So on behalf of myself, the Pro-Chancellor for Psych International University and Seminary, and the Director General for Wilmai ICC, Youth, Music, Cultural and Arts Forum, as well as Dr. Ada Okika, who is the Executive Director for St. Irene Menikaya Foundation International. I want to say thank you very much to all of our speakers here today for bracing us with your presence and for taking the time to unleash your knowledge to us, as well as to our listeners abroad. Thank you very much to our speakers, to our panelists. Thank you very much to all of the attendees who are here with us today. And at this time, it's safe for me to now say that you are now dismissed. Thank you very much. Go forth and let's make a change, and let's leave no one behind. Thank you.